Thank you. It's really good to be back with you guys. Are you having a good day so far?
Yes.
Because my day is going so good. I woke up early. I went to Pilates class. I did carriage Pilates. Then I did infrared sauna for half an hour. Then I did Newcom for 20 minutes. I just did Newcom just now. I went to the office, actually put in about an entire day's work in about 2 hours, which is what I have it figured out for. And now I'm here with you guys. So it's like, sometimes I feel like, I don't know, pinch me. It's wonderful. And it's an honor. The ethics of eating. That's what we're going to talk about today. Many people have said first of all, we need to welcome the online people. We're running. Are we running right now, Tony? We're running. So welcome to the online Hippocrates Health Institute Life Transformation. It's great that you're doing it online. I will also say that, as I said before on Monday, an ounce of experience is worth more than a ton of theories. So that means you need to turn off the computer when this is all done and come on down to Hippocrates Health Institute and come to these 50 acres, lush, beautiful tropical acres. It is the jewel of South Florida. Hippocrates is the jewel of Palm Beach County. And we're here with the health educators. Health educators, can you turn around and look at the camera? Is this a good place to come and learn about better living and a better way of life?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I thought. The ethics of eating. Well, it's been said there's 3 stages of veganism. Stage 1 is when let's say you come to Hippocrates for 3 weeks and you're vegan for the first time and all these changes happen and then you go home and you stay vegan and you're figuring things out and your health changes, your health improves. But there's people that will say, what about your protein? And you pretty much know that you don't need protein from animals. And people will say, well, if we stop eating animals, then the animals are going to take over the whole world. And have you thought about that? Because, you could just really be doing something bad with this vegan thing. And you go back and you do some research and you're still figuring things out. And people for, maybe not for malicious reasons, but, there's such compliance that we have in this world that's essentially organized around eating animals. And everyone's got a stake in keeping the status quo when it comes to a world organized around eating animals. But if you get through this stage 1, and then you get into stage 2, which is you've broken through and you feel amazing, and you look around and no one else seems to get it. And you look around and you say, why isn't the rest of the world vegan? And stage 2 is, they call it the angry vegan stage. When you're like mad, you get in fights at parties and with people who are eating animal products, and you've got all these facts and figures and you're trying to change them. And what we talked about, remember we talked on Monday about changing people. The only person we can change is ourselves. Because if somebody walks up to me and tries to change me, I don't care if it's the best idea in the world. I don't care if it's good for me. I'm sure as hell going to resist that person. If we stay with it, and we stay angry, hopefully not for too long, the angry vegan stage. Stage 3. And stage 3, on the one hand, it's the final stage. But on the other hand, it's never ending. And it's the beautiful stage. It's called the deep veganism stage. It's deep veganism where we are compassionate, not just for ourselves and our own bodies, not just for the food animals that have been endowed with an ability to suffer, that otherwise were put here, believe it or not, to live purposeful and celebratory lives. And when we're eating their flesh, that we're taking away their purpose, and we are certainly disallowing them to live otherwise celebratory lives, right? So we have compassion for them, obviously. But then the deep veganism stage is when we actually expand our sphere of compassion to include the people that are still fucked up, to include the people that are still eating animal, maybe even proud about it, or maybe even they say, I know I just can't do it. And we're going to talk about some of those ideas, but we're also going to talk about some history and actually there will be some, I'll call it some, not duplication, but some, what's the word I'm looking for? Like a layover, like a... Overlap. Thank you so much. Thank you. You can be excused now. You know everything. Okay. There will be some overlap. But like any good idea, like food is your medicine, medicine is your food, I think good ideas are worth perhaps reinforcing. Not just repeating, but reinforcing. The World Peace Diet, you heard me talk about it on Monday. It is considered the most important book of the last 100 years. It actually won the Courage of Conscience Award. Will Tuttle won the Courage of Conscience Award, which is the equivalent of the Nobel Peace Prize for books. Here's a quote that I thought was great. We can start off with that. The suffering that the food animals undergo, the suffering of those who eat them and profit by them. The suffering of starving people who could be fed with the grain that feeds these animals, and the suffering we thoughtlessly impose on the ecosystem, other creatures, and future generations are all interconnected. It's this interconnectedness of suffering and its reverse of love, caring, and awareness that calls out for our understanding. So here at Hippocrates, I'm proud to say that as far as I know, this is the first presentation, the first class, if you will, that I developed that deals with something, that deals with the food animals, that deals with what we call the deep veganism, the deeper stages of what it means. It's not just about our health. And so that's why I say going from nutritional vegan, that's veganism through the side door, veganism through the front door is, like we said this on Monday, we're all interconnected, that the food animals have been endowed with an ability to suffer. Now the reason I bring this up again, it's like a double-edged sword. I mean, Hippocrates is a nonprofit, but it's also a business. So guess what? People come back over and over again. But once people, if they made the connection that what's on their plate represents confinement, represents hard-heartedness, represents mutilation, castration without anesthesia, represents execution against a sentient being that would do anything to get out of the situation that it's in, that needed mercy at the time that we showed mercilessness. Once we make that connection, we would never ever be tempted by another animal product. Again, people ask me, don't you miss ribs, or don't you miss those big sausages with the toasted bun and the melted cheese? And I say to them, I do not miss that so-called food. I would just as soon pick up your arm and take a bite out of your arm. Once we make the connection, it's only human nature. If you come here to Hippocrates, somebody comes here and they halt, reverse, and resolve a catastrophic problem because Hippocrates helps people help themselves, gives them the information, allows their immune system to bounce back. After chemo and radiation absolutely destroys the immune system. We all know that. If you solve this problem and you did it for yourself, that's great. But then you go home, and then all of a sudden, next thing you know, and I know because I've been through this whole thing before myself, although thank God I haven't had a catastrophic problem, but after I left Hippocrates the first time, I had some cheat days. Where I introduced, then I went to Japan, and I went to what's that place where they have that really fancy steak? Not Kyoto, but Kobe. And I had a $300 steak, like 6 months after being to Hippocrates for the first time. A $300 steak. They actually bring out this big trophy with 2 columns on both sides. When they bring out the food, it's called the champion steak. Anyway. So you start introducing, the next thing you know, you're back to the SAD diet, the standard American diet. Once you make the connection about the consequences of our food choices, then we would never be tempted. The truth is that whether we're talking about our bodies, whether we're talking about society, whether we're talking about our relationships with each other, the consequences of our food choices have profound effects on our physiology, our mental wealth, and our society. We are going to talk about the fact that we're born into a herding culture. Have you heard of this term, the herding culture, before? It's also been known as, we learned it, you probably learned it in school, as the domestication of animals. And it seems like we live under the invisible trance of a term that Dr. Melanie Joy called carnism. Have you heard of carnism before? We're going to talk about that as well. We're going to touch on that. Our culture says in no uncertain terms that we have the right to eat the animals, to confine them, to hurt them, to take their milk, to take their children. We're even told that God grants us this right, that we need to eat these animal foods to be healthy and strong. I remember when I went to church camp. I went to church camp from 8 years old for 8 summers straight. And more than once, and I'm not going to put down my religion, identify as a Christian, but more than once the priest, you're a child and you're asking questions when you're 10 years old, right? And you say, well, what about the animals? Why, if thou shalt not kill, then why are we killing the animals? And the priest would tell me and tell the campers that they don't have souls, and that gives us the right to do what we do to the animals. And unfortunately, when we eat animal products, we find ourselves as people, as individuals, as society, we find ourselves creating within ourselves and without ourselves, outside, a deep split. What happens with the deep split is an exclusion. We view some beings as special, that's us, and that's also the family pet. And then we view other sentient beings, namely the food animals, as inconsequential. And then what happens when we view those beings as inconsequential, the next thing you know, we're looking at other cultures, we're looking at other people as inferior to us, and we go to war with them, we make slaves out of them. And so we fall into the trap of thinking that other cultures are not as good as ours, and that they're worthy of conquest, that they're worthy of domination and war. And the thing about that is this mentality definitely affects, it comes from the mentality that comes from our meals, poisons our relationships with other people, becomes the very society that we live in. But we're in chronic denial about the consequences of our food choices, and we're disconnected. So in our culture, starting from very young children, we're this food that we didn't even have a chance to decide for ourselves what to eat. This food is injected to us at a very deep level, at a very young age. We're told it's no big deal, don't think about it, that the animals were put here for us to eat. But the thing is, once you realize what's going on, you realize that the animals haven't been endowed with an ability to suffer, and we'll actually soon, in a few moments, we'll go into the science of, do animals feel pain? So then the question is, there's so many problems in the world today, but could it be that the root cause of our crisis is right there on our plate? Just think about it. If the whole world went vegan overnight, so many problems would be solved. So, certainly environmental problems. The oceans would come back, the rainforests would come back, the pollution would stop, heart disease would basically be a thing of the past, right? My parents, I don't want to bring them up, but they're wonderful people. They've been married for 55 years. And my dad was a bit of a hard ass growing up, especially on me as his first son. But they went vegan about 3.5 years ago. And my dad is like the nicest person. And he doesn't want to admit that it's the veganism. They went through the program here, but that's my theory anyway. The herding culture. Does anybody remember the graphic that was on the screen when we started this afternoon? It was a graphic. It was animals cavorting. Do you know what that was?
It looked like the ark in the garden.
Very close. It was the Garden of Eden. Right. Okay. You went to Sunday school and you paid attention, right? Right. And so, the Garden of Eden, whether you believe it as a literal, thing of history, occurrence of history, or a mythological lesson to be learned from. The Garden of Eden was the garden of vegan before the fall. Did you know that? And so something happened about 10,000 years ago. About 10,000 years ago, we started herding animals against their will. And before that, and in the Garden of Eden, the Garden of Vegan, the animals essentially were mysterious co-passengers along with us on this planet that we find ourselves in. And they were and are put on this planet to live celebratory and purposeful lives. But the herding culture happened about 10,000 years ago. In modern-day Iraq, what was called Mesopotamia, the domestication of animals. And when we confined animals against their will, it required the opposite of what plant agriculture requires. Remember, we talked about plant agriculture requiring basically Sophia wisdom, inherent wisdom, love, nurturing, watering, and this animal agriculture, which was practiced by men, requires rough handling, hard-heartedness, and of course, ultimately execution. And it was passed down from generation to generation because the young boys are on the farm, or the young boys are there where they're holding the animals, and the men teach it to the boys, just like our parents taught us how to eat before we could even decide how to eat, and their parents and their parents. If you think about it, the most intimate aspect of any culture, the most telling aspect of any culture is the food that we eat and how we eat the food. We sit down at every meal. How do we celebrate holidays, right? We celebrate holidays by sitting down and having a meal. So then this happened, and as we discussed on Monday, the two institutions that are a direct result of animal agriculture are armed conflict. Cows have always meant wealth. As a matter of fact, the oldest word for war in the human condition, Sanskrit word for war, means the desire for more cows. The word capitalism comes from per head of cattle, per capita, right? And when you went to war and you weren't killed, you became a slave. Turn on the audio. So before I went on my big trip, I spoke for a few years at a conference called Freedom Fest. It's in Las Vegas, and I gave the talk on veganism a couple of years. Before that, it was T. Colin Campbell was the vegan guy, and then he stopped traveling as much, and now I started to talk there. I began to talk there. So I was at the gate at Fort Lauderdale, and I saw this nice couple, and they were holding a cat, and I told them, I asked them if I could talk to them about the cat, and here's the audio. Attending a conference in Las Vegas where I'm the speaker on veganism. The idea that we love cats and dogs, but we eat cows, pigs, chicken, and fish. What's your thought on that? I don't eat meat, much beef. I can't stand the thought of killing them. Probably no. How about chicken? Do you eat chicken? Chicken I eat. I don't have attachment to chickens, I just don't. My mom grew up on a farm. But what would be the difference between the chicken and the cat? They're not cuddly, friendly, they make you feel good, but they can be. They don't live in your house. Folks, what belief system makes us love our cats and our dogs, but we eat cows, pigs, chicken, and fish? Why do we love dogs, eat pigs, but wear cows? And Dr. Melanie Joy coined the term, she called it carnism, where it's really just our perception. You see, if I had people who ate the standard American diet, if I had them over for dinner one night, and I made this beautiful pot pie, and everyone is sitting around the table eating it, and they say, this is just wonderful, what's in this pot pie that you made? And I say, oh, it's just a wonderful cut of Doberman Pinscher and some vegetables and a certain sauce. And they would just be like freaked out, right? And with carnism, it's normal, natural, and necessary. It seems to eat food animals, cows, pigs, chicken, fish, birds. Just like, and it's our perception, just like once upon a time, not even too long ago, it was normal, natural, and necessary. I love being at this time because now we have juice. See, folks at home, if you were here at Hippocrates, you'd be having the best cold-pressed juice this side of heaven made of sprouts, cucumber, and celery. Just saying. Just like not too long ago, it was normal, natural, and necessary to have a slave, to own slaves. And I would imagine that the people back in the antebellum South, only say 150 years ago, would find it very difficult to understand that what they were doing was wrong. That they would say that it's impossible, there's nothing wrong with owning slaves. And we also, for example, sexism. We know that sexism is wrong, and we've had a lot of that come to the surface in our society more recently with the Me Too movement. And we know that that is something that's not right. And so all of the isms, all the elitism, sexism, racism, all the isms, the so-called isms, actually are rooted in the idea of supremacy of the animals. And this Melanie Joy called carnism. And then so, how is it, what influences us? What influences us? Well, I call it the meat medical media industrial complex. And sometimes I imagine that there's this big office building like I see in this picture where they're all together, conspiring against us. But it's not quite like that. Well, let me explain the meat medical industrial complex. We turn on the TV. And what do you see when the advertisements come on? You see advertisements for the food, like, well, we'll call it something else. McMurder, Murder King, Kentucky Fried Cruelty, Outhouse Steakhouse. Then after those advertisements play, then what's on next? Not feeling so well, cholesterol got you down. Have you had a heart attack? And then how about the disclaimers of the side effects that they have? Thoughts of suicide and sudden death and kidney failure and just all these terrible things. It's like unbelievable. And then I love it actually. Then sometimes the attorneys come on, and they want to know if you've taken this drug that killed somebody, or somebody that killed somebody or if you've eaten something. The lawyer. So it's just this vicious cycle, and it's all facilitated by the gag media. It's an unwritten rule. And I know this from my own business experience. It's an unwritten rule that the media, television, radio, and so on, newspapers for sure, do not publish articles that are detrimental against their advertisers. And you know what? In a somewhat, I'll say free society, because just to speak broadly, free society, some of that's okay, because we're the CEO of our lives. No one's looking out for you but you. And so we have to, we can complain about this, and we can be aware of it, but we have to have sovereignty over ourselves, at least from my perspective. And so what happens when we eat this food that makes us sick, we take the drugs that makes us sick, we become exploited, we become cash cows. We become exploited like they exploit on the dairy cow. We'll talk more about that when we'll go into more of the cause and effect, we'll go into karma. We become like the cash cows on the dairy farm. I don't use pictures of the animals in the slaughterhouse or videos of the animals in the slaughterhouse. But if you did want to see the hell on earth, if you wanted to look into the Holocaust that we are creating, that we're taking part of, because whether we do it or not ourselves, every time we take our wallet out and pay for meat, dairy products, and eggs, it's like a vote. And believe me, those votes at the grocery store get counted. The other votes in the voting booth. There's a great book called Stealing Elections. Those votes maybe don't get counted so well. There's some overvotes, there's some undervotes, but believe me, when you take out your wallet and buy meat, dairy products, and eggs, we're voting for that, and those votes definitely get counted. So I don't show the pictures, and a lot of people will say, well, are you going to show pictures of the animals? Because if you do, I don't want to, let me know ahead of time. I'm going to put my head down because I don't want to see if you're going to show videos. Or are you going to show videos of the animals or pictures of the animals? Because if you do, I'm just going to maybe sit this one out. I'm not going to attend your talk today. I say, no, don't worry. But I think it begs the question, why do we not want to see I mean, no one here is raising their hand saying, please, please, please show me pictures and videos. No one wants to see it. Why do we not want to see it? I mean, don't you think folks should be held accountable? Don't you think folks should know where the hell breakfast, lunch, and dinner comes from? And so we have to ask ourselves, if it's not suitable for our eyes and ears, how could it be suitable for our bodies, right? If it's not suitable for our eyes and ears, how could it be suitable for our souls? But there's a gift. There's a gift in all of this. Our inherent wisdom for compassion, our Sophia wisdom that as we've said, is feminine in nature, but men and women have this Sophia wisdom. Men and women have this Sophia wisdom, compassion within our own humanity. And so Johnny Depp has this quote. Johnny Depp is a better actor and a better vegan activist than he is a businessman. He's not very good with his money. I think he ran into some financial problems. I read that he had a $30,000 a month wine habit, just on wine. Spent $30,000 a month, and he has like 5 or 6 homes. One of them's an island. Anyway, he's a much better vegan than being careful with his money, right? And his quote is, if you don't like seeing pictures of violence toward the animals being posted, you need to stop the violence, not the pictures. So the analogy I'd like to make on that when we eat animals is, I call it the court of law, the hitman, and the mafia boss. Before I go into the analogy about the mafia boss, is anybody here in the mafia? No? Okay, good. So now I can speak freely. Now I can speak freely then. You see, the court of law makes no distinction between the mafia boss and the hitman. The hitman follows the orders that the mafia boss gave him, right? As a matter of fact, in many cases, the mafia boss who orders the death and the execution that's carried out by the hitman, the mafia boss actually gets the harsher punishment. And so when we go to the grocery store and we get the animal's body parts in nice, neat little packages, wrapped up in cellophane, it looks nice and neat, and we go to the counter and we go to the cashier and she smiles at us and we smile at her. As soon as we take out the money and pay for it, we are like the mafia boss that orders the hit. We didn't kill the animal, but we paid someone to kill the animal. And like we talked about Monday, who are we paying? These poor workers, these factory workers. It's unconscionably bad, awful work, who as a group, right, have the highest rate of spousal abuse, alcohol abuse, drug abuse, and suicide, because what they know they're doing is wrong. It's called self-induced post-traumatic stress disorder. And so, but we're disconnected. When we eat animal foods, we're disconnected. We don't even realize that we're like the mafia boss that orders the hit. Well, let's look into whether or not animals feel pain. I know I'm preaching to the choir here. I think everybody understands that. The other day I asked how many people, I never like eating before I speak, and I had a really nice cauliflower rice stir fry. Sorry it wasn't raw. I had a wonderful cauliflower rice stir fry before I came, and the nice thing about it is I can keep enjoying it. It just keeps coming back. Anyway. Everybody understands that animals feel pain, that animals are the subjects of their lives. What's important to them is like what's important to us. And the other day I asked how many of you had companion animals, whether it be cats or dogs, and just about everybody raised their hand. And just about everybody nodded their head in affirmation when I said the statement that when you look into the eyes of an animal, you know there's someone in there. But from a scientific point of view, people want to know, do the animals feel pain? Well, what does the science say? In 2012, a group of scientists created what's called the Declaration of Consciousness. The science says that all beings with a central nervous system feel pain like we do. What's a central nervous system? Basically, it's what we call a vertebrate animal. any animal with a spine. Any animal with a spine has a central nervous system that then goes to a brain that actually will feel pain. So an animal will react by crying, shrieking, eating less food. They give distress calls. They breathe differently. They will have cardiovascular changes. They release hormones. And the picture's not so great here, but this is a bull in the middle of a bullfight. You can see right here is a tear from the bull. Animals also have empathy. In one study, they took a group of monkeys and they set up a system where they would give the monkeys a treat, a food treat, if they pressed a button and electrically shocked another group of monkeys. And the scientists were so surprised because the monkeys would rather starve than shock their fellow monkeys. So animals actually have empathy. And so we have to ask ourselves, thank you, is that my juice?
Yes.
Would mankind be so noble? I want to take a big sip. Guys, this is what you're missing. You online people, take a look at this. That is so good. Oh my God. You know, I try to make this at home. I have a Norwalk cold press juicer. I try to use, like they say, what's 50% cucumber, celery, and 25% pea sprout, 25% sunflower, right?
Yeah.
And I just can never get it to taste like that. Just like I can never get the hummus. The hummus here is the best hummus in the world. And the house dressing, that yellow stuff, I can also never get the hummus or the house dressing to taste the way. I think they published one, my theory is that they published one set of, from the kitchen book. I want to say cookbook. I don't want to say cookbook because we don't cook the food here, right? They publish one thing with the so-called ingredients and the way they make it. I think they have like a secret, like off the record one, but yeah, that's right. So we're gonna dive a little deep into what happens on the factory farm without getting too graphic, and certainly we won't show any pictures. But the factory farms today are really like prisons. They're like concentration camps. And it's so great with social media now. Everyday people are starting to see the hell on earth that we've created, the hell on earth that we're supporting when we eat animal foods. There's 9.1 billion animals slaughtered annually in the United States. That's nearly 300 per second. And there's 70 billion land animals worldwide slaughtered. But that's land animals. Anybody know how approximately how many fish in marine life are taken for food? Okay, so there's actually not a number. They don't know the exactly number. They think it's between 2.2 trillion to 3 trillion. And they don't know the number because they measure by weight. So just think about that for a minute. Imagine these animals that feel pain. And there's a great book called What a Fish Knows. What a Fish Knows is a fantastic book. What a Fish Knows, what I know about What a Fish Knows is that the fish are really smart. I mean, they have built-in GPS systems. They're monogamous for a lot of their life. Many of the species are monogamous. They travel in schools, but they can tell each other apart by the thousands. Can tell each other apart. They remember mazes a year later. So even like something is, there's a lot of pescatarians that have compassion for land animals, and I get that, and it's a step in the right direction. But they're all the subjects of their lives. They're all special. They're all put here to live celebratory and purposeful lives. So what I'm getting at is the fact that they measure it by the weight. Imagine if I took you and said, or Vera, and said, I'm going to sell you off by weight. And we're just going to sell you as a commodity by the pound. And you would say, no, I'm Vera. I'm a mother of 3. I have a loving husband. I have this. I don't know what your hobbies are, but I'm a good painter. Let's say I'm a good painter. I'm an opera singer, or whatever it is that you do. I'm more than just weight. And so that's one of the big problems we have with this herding culture. This herding culture is that we've reduced, starting about 10,000 years ago, we reduced the animals from sentient beings to objects. And as I inferred in the beginning, once we did that to the animals from beings to objects, then we actually started doing, we reduced also women. We reduced it. There's actually before patriarchy, they've speculated that there was actually partnership societies between women and men before let's say, a male-dominated system, which we find ourselves to a large extent. And I'm not here to, I'm not one of those male basher types. I stick up for myself. But let's talk about the chicken and hatchery horrors. The chickens in these factory farms are packed tight in these little cages. It's like, and they can't move. It's like being in an elevator shaft. Imagine being packed into an elevator your whole life with 15 people you don't know, and you'd go crazy. And they actually do go crazy, and that's why they have to cut off their beaks to keep from pecking each other to death. They live in their excrement. The workers have to wear masks or they'll burn their nostrils and their eyes. Chickens lay 100 eggs a year in the factory farm because they're genetically manipulated. They lay, I forget what the number is, but a lot less eggs in natural. And don't forget too that the chickens lay eggs because they want to roost. A chicken lays an egg so it can raise a family. And a chicken wants to live with a rooster. And they want to teach their children how to eat. They want to teach their chicks vocalizations. They teach them the language. They want to live out what the kind of life we want to live out, a purposeful and celebratory lives. And so if we're vegetarians, we don't want to eat flesh of an animal. I appreciate that. It's certainly a step in the right direction. But the truth is, there's so much violence just in the egg industry. Did you know that when the chicks hatch and they see that it's a male, they just discard the chicken? And many times they just discard the male chick in a masticator, grind it up alive, and then they'll feed it to, say, the cows, or they'll feed it somewhere in the animal agriculture factory farm, or they'll just throw the chick in a dumpster with the other chicks and they suffocate against the weight of each other. Chickens will give eggs for a year and a half before they go to slaughter. They grow fast, and they can be killed in as little as 5 weeks. It's a miserable life. You could actually say that, you can make the argument that the best thing you could do with these chickens, bringing them into this world the way that we brought them into this world, the best thing you can do, the most merciful thing you could do is to end their life, because it's just, they don't have a life to speak of. They're transported in trucks, and it's just the cost of doing business that, because they don't give them food or water while they're transporting them in the trucks, just the cost of doing business that millions of them will die under the conditions of having no water. And this is an acceptable, and by the way, this is this is your humane, this includes your humane label that they pay extra money for. This is an interesting one, that chickens are exempted from the humane slaughter laws. Chicken and birds are exempted. Their beaks are chopped off, and free range, that's just a scam. That's nothing more than keeping the side door to the warehouse open so that they can go out and play, and then they actually purposely keep the outdoor area like all muddy and unkept so they don't want to go outside. The free range standard is not enforced. All you do is fill out a form, and then there's no controlling authority. They never go out to the farm to check it. So from this picture you can see the tiny hole in the room there makes that a free range farm. And yeah, so this is also free range because they're not in connection loss. Okay, they're not in cages. But see, they're packed together so tightly, and that's why they snip their beaks, so that they don't peck each other because they're literally losing their mind. Okay, so we have a clicker issue. Okay, well, I'll stay here for a sec. So that was 1957. Chicken weighed about 2 pounds. And then today in modern factory farming, now the chicken's about 9 pounds.
I just saw that light coming up.
All right, let's talk about the cows. Dairy consumption is basically an abomination against the mother-baby relationship. The industry calls it a rape rack. That's not a term that I've come up with or a disparaging term that as a vegan I call it. No, the industry calls it a rape rack, where you have to artificially, did it go off again? You have to artificially impregnate the cow with a sperm gun. And so I'll let your imagination run wild on that. I'll ask the question, how do you think they get the sperm? They have to manually manipulate the bulls. And naturally, the cows will give about 10 pounds of milk per day. And then on the factory farm, they manipulate them to give them, they produce about 120 pounds of milk per day. Yeah. So hello to everyone online. We just took a break, and you can take a break too. You can hit the pause button if you want. Go and have some juice, which is not nearly as good as the juice that you'll get when you come here. And so we'd like to see you come here. I've been saying that a lot. There it is right there. So right now we're going to talk a little bit of things that are hard to talk about, but then we'll break through that. I think we'll have some positive things to say. And yeah, we don't even like hearing it. Imagine if we saw it. And like we said, if it's not suitable for our eyes and ears, how could it be suitable for our bodies? If it's not suitable for our eyes and ears, right? How could it be suitable for our souls? But we have to get through this. Let's talk about the cows on the factory farm. Dairy consumption is basically an abomination. It destroys the mother-baby relationship. The industry calls it a rape rack. It's not a disparaging term that I, as a vegan, vegan activist, if you will say that. It's actually, the industry calls it a rape rack, where they artificially impregnate the cows so they can give milk. And so I'll just let your imagination run wild. How do you think they get the sperm that they put in the sperm gun? They actually have to go to the bulls for that. Some very smart people along the way have told me they had no idea that a cow had to be pregnant in order to give milk. They just thought that the cow gave milk. That's just how it was since they were a baby, and everything was okay with the world. Well, no, you have to artificially impregnate a cow against her will. And once she's pregnant, she starts to give milk. And in the wild, naturally, the cow will give about 10 pounds of milk a day. But on the factory farm, they drive them so hard as like slaves that they give up to 120 pounds a day. How do they do that? They do that with hormonal manipulation. They do that by feeding them fish feed, because half of what they fish for in the deep sea fishing, half of what they fish for, they pick up the non-target fish. So what they do with that, they grind it up and they feed it to the cows to fatten them up, and they make more milk when they feed them fish and they give them hormones. So they're driven so hard as slaves over and over again that this milk mustache that the milk industry was so proud about to advertise and brag about, and they had those celebrities with the milk mustache. The milk mustache is really a pus mustache, because the mastitis of the udder is so overworked that the cow leaves pus and blood, even in organic milk. And then once the baby is born, the newborns are stolen from the mother, and the mother and the baby cry for each other for days. I gave this talk in California a few years ago, and a version of this talk. And when I said that, a young lady in the back of the room raised her hand. She said, "I'm from a small village in Europe," and she said, when I'm in my family's farm, she says at night she can lay in bed at night and she hears the crying of the mother and the baby calf. And when she said that, the rest of the people in the hall just kind of had this collective gasp, because like I've been saying all along to these online folks, an ounce of experience is worth more than a ton of theories. Once you actually experience something, it's like, you know it's real. That's why some people go to church and they're so religious and they're God, 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 God. You can say God all you want, unless you actually have had a spiritual experience with the divine. then you really don't know who God is, do you? But I digress. The newborns are shackled, and they're killed as children for their soft meat. They're killed as children for their soft skin to make leather. The average life on a factory farm for cows is about 3 to 5 years, because they impregnate them over and over again about 3 or 4 times, and then they become what the industry calls spent. And they're spent, and they have osteoporosis from giving all that milk for their life, and they can barely make it down the chute, the kill chute, to the kill floor. They can barely make it. But in the wild, they will actually, it says 20 years here, they'll actually live up to 25 years. And then they're executed in a non-nice way. They're hung upside down, and they're bleeding. They bleed out. It's a painful death to bleed out. So that the pain, understand then, what we're paying for when we eat meat, dairy products, and eggs. We're paying for a misery that is, and pain that is so unconscionable, it's beyond our wildest imagination. But people will eat pizza, hot dogs, hamburgers, ice cream, without giving it a thought. We go to our church fundraiser Sunday afternoon in the church hall, and the pastor, the priest, and the parishioners are having a fundraiser for something, and they're eating ribs, and they're saying how great the ribs are. And that's the world that we live in. Domination of the feminine. Dairy food is nothing less than sexual violence. In animal agriculture, we have to objectify the females. We use the females in animal agriculture for financial gain and for gratification, basically, for our gastronomical gratification, right? And then in the human experience, all too often, society sees female humans as objects to be objectified and gratified. And I'm saying, in the deep vegan ideal, in the deep vegan perspective, that there is a connection. Sowing what we reap. On Monday, we talked about the 5 aspects of total health, which is our physical health, our mental health, our spiritual health, societal, and environmental. And in the spiritual health, we talked about karma. We talked about the law of cause and effect. We talked about what goes around comes around. Sowing what we reap. Well, in short, we kill the animals and the animals kill us. Bessie's revenge. We give the animals a toxic environment. We give them toxic food. We give them a terrible life. And then the next thing you know, we live in a toxic environment. We eat toxic food. And we live a horrible life. We destroy their family structure. We steal their babies. We steal their milk. We steal the purpose of their lives. We steal their happiness. And we take their life. And then we find ourselves in broken relationships. We find ourselves, and not to lay blame or to look down on anybody or anything in a situation, we all have a path. We find ourselves in broken homes, broken relationships, and all the things that mankind causes to the animals. It's so bad on a factory farm. It's so bad that they actually have to give the animals drugs for anxiety, depression, insomnia. And then in record numbers, we go to the doctor for what? Depression, anxiety, and insomnia. We stab, or we pay people to stab animals for a living, and then we get stabbed. How do we get stabbed? Well, what's the number 1 disease in the United States? It's heart disease, right? And heart disease, they have to stab us, they have to cut us open and take the vein and sew it onto our coronary artery, right? In the 16 countries that I gave presentations to, every one of them had the number 1 disease is heart disease. Because if I'm going to get up and say the number 1 disease, in the United States, I speak in the United States, it's easy. You can never forget. It's the number 1 disease and cause of death. But if you're speaking in Malaysia, or you're speaking in Thailand, or you're speaking somewhere in South America, you better, if you're going to say it's the number 1 disease, you better check it out. But it was always in the top 3. It was always in the top 3. So we stab and we get stabbed. If our diabetes is so bad, we have to cut off a leg. We have to cut off a leg. We have to do drastic procedures. We overfeed them. You saw the picture of the chicken, right? From 2 pounds to 9 pounds. And then we're overfed. The animal and the animal eater, the dairy eater, sows thousands and thousands of karmic seeds. And it would be naive to think that he does not reap what he sows. So there is a connection. And so on a very deep level, I believe we have a physiology of peace. We've been given a body that does not require animal foods. We've been given a body that does not require animal foods. And that's not just philosophical. That's actually scientific. We know this. Our teeth are canines, or kinos are canine in name only. They're not meant for ripping. Imagine if we had to kill an animal literally with our own hands and our own mouth. Our teeth are meant for grinding things, not for ripping flesh. Our digestive system is very long and cavernous, so it can soak up all the phytochemicals and the nutrients, the vitamins and minerals and the fiber, right? And the apex predator, like the lion, his digestive system is really short, right? So it could push out the decomposing flesh really, really quickly. So it's not just a philosophy here. It's obvious that our bodies were made for plants. So this is a gift. And what happens when we take this gift and we say, to hell with it, we're going to eat animal foods anyway? Is it a stretch to think that we sow the seeds of our own destruction? Here's a quote, and then a video. When an animal kills a human for food, he's neglecting his own hunger for justice. Man prays for mercy but is unwilling to extend it to others. Why should he then expect mercy from God? It's unfair to expect something that you're not willing to give. It's inconsistent. And so now I'd like to show you a video, a word, a message from Dr. Will Tuttle. Oh, almost not yet. This is the miracle at Fatima in Portugal when I was there. And these people are walking on their knees. These are good Catholics. These are very pious Catholics. And that is the shrine, that is the place where the Virgin Mary appeared right before World War I ended, or World War II. She predicted the end of the war, and she told the children some things, and she said she was going to come back. And it's a whole big story, but it's one of the millions of people who come every year, especially Catholics come. And so I was there. That was me filming. And this is me in Portugal, in Lisbon, Portugal. It's an amazing place. I'm actually going there next Friday to come back. I loved it there so much in Portugal. But it occurred to me something very, very ironic. I saw it all right then and there, folks. I saw these people walking on their knees, some of them on their hands and knees. And I thought to myself, what are they all asking for? They're all asking for different things, but if you summed it all up into one word, they're asking for mercy. And so it struck me as ironic. How can we ask for something we're not willing to give? Seems to me that it would be futile, ironic, and that it would never be possible to happen. And so again, this deep veganism thing, it's not about me or you or anyone else standing up here and saying, I'm the vegan, you need to change your lifestyle, you need to change your diet, you need to change what you're doing is wrong, you. It's not about that. It's about expanding your sphere of compassion. And then so actually my dream for this vegan thing that we're all a part of is to just walk into a room and everyone turns vegan. Just like that. And that will happen too someday soon. In our lifetime, first of all, let's get it straight right now. In our lifetime, the world will definitely be vegan. It'll be like, sure there'll be pockets of things, but it'll be like slaves. I mean, technically there's slavery still in the world today, right? But it'll be just, I'm sure there's some places that still practice voodoo. Maybe some places that still do some bloodletting to get the bad blood out, but basically I think we're definitely, one way or the other, we're in the last days of eating animals. Let's put it that way. Oh, so the video I thought I was going to play for you is coming in a few moments, not when I thought it was. Do plants have feelings? Well, we went over the science about animals feeling pain, and so this little segment came up because I got pissed off I got pissed off at my brother because I think it was Thanksgiving or it was Christmas time. Now there's like 3 vegans in the family, my parents, myself, and my sister and her family of 5. They're all aspiring. There's basically 2 kinds of people, vegans and pre-vegans. So it depends on where on the spectrum you are on that. And my sister and her family are aware, and they're juicing, and they want to be plant-based. They stop drinking milk. They do almond milk, little things like that. But they're not vegan, but they're aware. And then there's my brother and his family, and my brother wants to have nothing to do with it. My brother's wife wants to have nothing to do with the idea of vegan, and he will always say, but plants have feelings too. So I got really peed off on it. I actually decided to look into this thing, and the idea. And I talked to Gabriel Cousins, Rabbi Gabriel Cousins, a medical doctor, about it when I visited his retreat in Arizona. This idea that plants have feelings. Let's look into it. It was originally suggested in a book called The Secret Life of a Plant. And there have been some articles in the newspaper, sorry vegans, Brussels sprouts like to live too, and so on. But like we saw in the science about the declaration of consciousness, plants are not vertebrate animals, they're not vertebrate beings. Therefore, because they don't have spines, they're not vertebrates. They're not sentient. And therefore they have no brain, and they have no central nervous system, so they cannot feel the same way that a cow, pig, chicken, or fish does, or a human being. A plant reacts, but an animal feels and responds. A plant will turn towards the sun to maximize optimal life, just like a bell will ring if you run an electric wire through it, but neither is a sentient being. But a pig, on the other hand, will respond with shrieks of fear and pain when the pig is executed. So the idea here is a plant is something, but an animal is someone. So when, as vegans, when we talk about the animal kingdom, we talk about dogs, we talk about pets, and this actually took some practice with me, and it was pointed out to me. We want to get away from using it. It's them. It's actually a being. So beings are not its. Beings are someone. Beings are they, or beings are her or him, and so on. And then so I told my brother at that dinner table, the holiday dinner table, if you still feel sorry for the plant, just imagine how many plants we could save if we stopped eating animals. Because almost all the plants that are grown go to feed the animals. But when you think about it, plants are part of the cycle of life. We have to ask ourselves, don't we have a right to eat and grow food? I mean, we're not breatharians, are we? We're not. You heard of breatharians? Breatharians supposedly live on water and ether and sunlight. They're supposedly, they estimate about 4,000 breatharians, and about 3,999 of them are liars, because they do sneak food. I'm on to them. I'm on to them. I think I have their number, and I think it's great. I would like to fast for long periods of time. And Brian will tell you can go without food for at least a month and be fine as long as you hydrate. I think it's 11 days for water, where you actually will die. You can't go beyond 11 days. I forget the number. 7? Okay, thank you for clarifying that. So we have a right to eat and grow food, but when you think about it, we have a symbiotic relationship between us and the plants. Plants give off oxygen, right? We breathe the oxygen. And what do we breathe out? We breathe out CO2, which if you actually bought half of what I said on Monday about the idea of climate change, CO2 is the lifeblood of the planet. CO2, the plants thrive on CO2. The plants need CO2. The plants have phytochemicals that we need. Plants have phytochemicals. So we have this symbiotic relationship. So if the plants could speak, they would say, they are so happy. Thank you so much that I'm part of the cycle of life with you. Please eat us, right? But if the animals could speak, wow. They would say, please stop what you're doing to us. Please stop. Please stop. You know, there's a, and I hate anti-human being memes, but there's a meme that I can't forget that really was so good it sucks. It said that if animals had a religion, you seen this one? If animals had a religion, we'd be Satan. Right? So I want to unthink that, and I want to have a world where that's not the case. This whole thing, this carnism, this ideological trance, the idea that we're born into a culture that's organized around eating animals, the idea that we're born into a herding culture where we've reduced the animals from sentient beings to objects, and then we count them like per capita per head, and that's our wealth through history. This whole thing creates this condition where what's normal is abnormal. We find a world here where we're upside down a little bit. Kill a dog and you go to jail, but if you kill kill 100 cows, you get a paycheck, right? You kill thousands of cows or millions of cows as the owner of the factory farm. You get respect in the community, you get admiration as a good businessman, and you even get a powerful voice in Congress. So powerful that if you sneak into their business or you go undercover into the factory farm business and you record what's going on there and they catch you, it gets traced back to you. You can actually go to jail. You'd be tried under the United States terrorism laws. Did you know that? Because they don't want you to see. They want us to stay disconnected. Where actually the whole thing, the whole web, is a web of interconnectedness. What's normal is abnormal. People pray for peace at the dinner table. People walk on their knees at the miracle of Fatima. They want peace at the dinner table. They sit around, the family sits around the dinner table, holds hands maybe, prays for peace. And then moments later, they dine on the corpses of animals that were produced through violence. How can we ask for peace if we're not willing to give peace, right? People around the world starve to death because they don't have the grain that was sold to feed the animals so that rich people like us can eat the animal and get sick. I say rich people like us. Do you know if whoever makes or brings in or is worth about $30,000 a year is in the top 1% of the world. So we're very rich by comparison to the rest of the world. Animal meat is seen as simple and cheap, but it's difficult and expensive. And plant agriculture is seen as difficult and is expensive, but it has 15 times less use of land, water, and resources. It's actually cheap and inexpensive. And as Brian likes to say, that sprouts, it's the one thing, remember I showed you, I told you about the wildflower home in Thailand, and I gave them a sprout workshop, and then 3 weeks later, after I was already in Malaysia, they sent me a picture of this big bowl of mung bean sprouts that they were feeding the children. And the one thing that I think the reason why they stayed with it after I was long gone, the one thing I kept saying, and there was a bit of a language barrier, there was a translator, so it's not like I gave them something like this. The only thing I said the whole time I showed them how to make the sprouts, and I came back the next day and we ate a bunch of sprouts. I kept saying, high nutrition, low cost for the children. High nutrition for the children at low cost. High nutrition for the children at low cost. And then like 30 seconds would go by and I would say, high nutrition for the children and low cost. And of course, a place like that has a obviously budgetary constraints, right? And I think they realized that they could really get a hell of a bang for the buck with mung bean seeds and sprouts. And so this idea that being vegan is expensive is actually just another myth that we can power through. What's normal is abnormal. People say vegan food tastes gross, but then they season their meat with vegan food to make it taste so good. So a word on religion. Veganism is in profound alignment with the world's major religions. We have the Ten Commandments in the Judeo-Christian example. We have the Hindu principle of ahimsa. Veganism is in profound alignment with the core teaching. And what's the core teaching of all the religions? The core teaching is love others. It's not New Age. It's thousands of years old. It says, I will never be happy so long as I'm harming someone else for my own benefit. Now here's the video that I thought I was going to play you 5 or so minutes ago, and now I have it. So please enjoy a word from Dr. Will Tuttle.
Why is it that the people who we look to for spiritual guidance, or in some cases religious guidance, why are they no longer abiding by the teaching of ahimsa? Any authentic spiritual teacher will say, listen everybody, if we want to actually call ourselves people who are on a spiritual path of awakening, we cannot be taking out our wallets and paying for meat, dairy products, and eggs, because this is paying for rape and killing of children and breaking the bond between the mother and the offspring, and environmental devastation and war and hunger, and forcing workers to stab animals all day. I mean, how is it possible that someone who sets themselves up to be a spiritual teacher could not bring this up, not question this, and further, and actually be doing this themselves? I think it's really not possible. And I'm not criticizing anyone who considers themselves to be a spiritual teacher, or people who are following spiritual teachers who are eating animal foods. There's no criticism. It's just simply saying that we've all been wounded by being raised in this society, so we're blind. We have blinders slapped onto us, and we see spirituality in a very narrow way. We all know that animals are capable of suffering, that they do have interests, that they are the subjects of their lives, that their suffering is to them as significant to them as my suffering is to me. And so if that's true, which it is, and we all know that, then our treatment towards them is ethically based. It has to be ethically and morally founded upon the same principles that we have for each other, not to kill and steal and abuse these other beings who have interests just like we do. So it's past time for us as a society and as individuals to hold the spiritual teachers in our world accountable for their actions. That they're not eating animal foods. If they're going to be our spiritual teachers, they're not eating animal foods. They're not, and furthermore, they're encouraging their students to question eating animal foods. I mean, this should be foundational. This is so obvious today. Maybe in the past it wasn't so obvious, but today with 7 billion people and the complete destruction of ecosystems due to animal agriculture and the violence to these animals and the hyper-confinement and mutilation of animals, the violence, abuse, and devastation, the disease and hunger and injustice, all radiating from animal agriculture, makes it clear that anyone who is a spiritual teacher or a political activist or an activist for social justice in any way needs to be aware and to live a life we would call a vegan life. I think it's too bad that we have to use a word like vegan to describe just what is basically just coming home to our own true nature and just seeing beings when we see beings and not seeing commodities. This is our natural wisdom. And I think this is what veganism is, and this is the foundation of spiritual teachings. And so if we want to have a future for our children, and we can see that there is a doorway opening for a positive future, that those of us who are teachers, and I think in a deep sense all vegans are teachers, because if we're living this, we're exemplifying a life where this pathway to a world of peace and harmony is actually being lived by us, that we can treat not only all the non-human animals of the world with kindness and respect, but also treat each other as human animals with kindness and respect in all of our relations. This is an ongoing challenge, a never-ending challenge, and we can all improve our ability at doing this. So again, I want to thank all of you for the efforts you're making, and know that the vegan path, the path of ahimsa, of nonviolence, the spiritual path of awakening from the delusion of separateness and from the underlying delusions in our society, from decolonizing our own consciousness, from understanding our connection with an inner wisdom that can guide us in our life. And that as we do this and live this, we're creating a movement of peace and freedom that will benefit not only us, but all living beings. Thank you very much.
I mean, that's the real deal. I hope you can come back, and when Will comes once a year for 4 or 5 days. He works with the health educators, and then he also, they do a public event, and then we do some events around town. We do events in Miami, and we really put him to work, and he's just, can you tell he's just like a great guy? And he and Brian are colleagues and friends, so he's, a great friend of the Institute. So this presentation has been called The Ethics of Eating. So it's, say, 99, 98% about the food. But what else? What kind of shoes are we wearing? For myself, I'm not here bragging or anything, but I stopped wearing leather a couple years ago, and I found some great sources for vegan shoes and vegan belts and vegan accessories. And so it's not just the clothes. And this is a cotton jacket. It's not wool. What kind of car interior do we have? My car interior is leather, but I got my car, say, 4 years ago. And so I'm actually waiting. Tesla has man-made option interior actually, they only offer that in the Tesla. Mercedes is offering it with a crazy upcharge. And I'm actually waiting a couple years, and then I'm going to see what kind of man-made options there are with the cars. And I'm actually holding on to my car because I just don't want to go out and have another 4 years with leather. I want to actually and the Tesla, I'm just scared. I'm afraid I'm going to run out of electricity in the middle of the road, and I'm not there yet. And I know they have an app, and Brian tells me how much he loves his Tesla. I know they have an app where it tells you the closest one, but I'm still a gas station guy, so forgive me for that. Vivisection, using animals in science for testing. That now there's more and more products where they're bragging they're not using it for testing. They're not using animals for testing. And with computers and simulation and all the data that they have now, that's, I think, going to be going by the wayside. Animals for entertainment. Barnum and Bailey Circus actually closed, I think, 3 years ago. The longest running circus in history closed its doors. And the reason they closed their doors, for some of the very ideas that we're talking about today. So things are moving in the right direction. So it's beyond the food, it's what we're wearing, using all byproducts of that come from an animal. And that if we abstain from all of that with the food, that would exemplify really what veganism is. But actually is an official definition of veganism. The official definition, and I'm going to paraphrase it with, I think, an important idea about it. Veganism is to abstain from all animal products, not just food, but all animal products, as best as you can. So if I break down and I go and have a pepperoni pizza, that's not included in that. But if I'm going to live in the world, I'm going to get on Southwest Airlines and fly from PBI to Philadelphia for $250, and I get into the Southwest Airlines leather seat. I mean, what am I going to do? I'm not going to not go on Southwest Airlines. I'm not going to get in my friend's car. I'm not going to throw out all my furniture, right? We do the best that we can. We do the best that we can. So my niece graduated summa cum laude in college, and she took some public speaking course. And she actually gave me this idea. She said, in public speaking, you tell them what you're going to tell them, then you tell them then you tell them what you told them. So here's the slide where I'm going to tell you what I told you. You can learn a lot. I'm an old dog, but I can learn a lot of things from a younger person like my niece. So veganism through the front door is when it's not about us. We recognize these are sentient beings that are the subjects of their lives, that were put here for celebratory and purposeful lives, that they're not things. They've been endowed with an ability to suffer. That's veganism through the front door. Once we recognize that, besides the veganism through the side door, which is about us and our health and doing it for us. Once we recognize that, we would never be tempted by animal products. At least that's been my experience. The root cause of our crisis lies on our plates because the two institutions, as a direct result of eating animals, is war and slavery. We have cultural programming known as carnism. We have this herding culture that we're born into. We're born into a society that's basically organized around eating animals. Animals feel pain. Plants don't have feelings. And all of this doesn't come without a cost. We sow what we reap. Religion. The religions are in profound alignment with the veganism is in profound alignment with the basic tenets of veganism. So we've spoken about the hell on earth with the factory farms. We've spoken about what happens, what they do to these animals. And some of it hasn't been too pretty to talk about, right? But this is actually really good news because it doesn't have to be this way. And like we said on Monday, and I think it's worth reinforcing this idea that this veganism is really a liberation. It's a way out. It's walking through a different door than the doors we've been previously shown. We are like the cows. They didn't choose it, and we didn't choose it. And if we're eating meat and dairy, we are like the cows on the dairy farm. We are being exploited like dairy cows, and we are essentially just following the orders we're given as children and as adults. So let's stop following orders. Remember, in the elevator close on Monday, we talked about why be vegan? And the quote is, "I'm deeply grateful that I discovered that the only reason I was eating animal foods is because I was following orders. And I'm no longer following orders anymore, and it's fantastic." Short and sweet and simple. And because we're not trying to change people on the spot, they're going to have to figure it out for themselves. But we can, that doesn't mean we can't be advocates, right? I'm not following it anymore. I'm not doing it anymore. And it's fantastic. Veganism liberates us because once we stop following orders, we realize that we are free and happy in countless ways. We will be free when we free others. We can be free from the bad dream and the invisible ideology of eating animals. I bet you're wondering who that lady is. And I'm going to tell you in a minute. The medical media industrial complex is designed to dumb us down. But the mind is vast and free. When we follow orders, when we eat animal foods, it fogs our mind. It clogs up our mind. But when we eat a world peace diet, when we eat vegan, it blesses us. We bless each other. We bless the animals. We bless ourselves. We bless the universe. This lady is the oldest living lady that we know of right now. She lives in Italy. She's 116 years old. She has a birthday cake there. I cut off the one. It actually says 117. I think they want her to keep thinking about staying alive, right? And they asked her, "What's it like? What was it like? What does it feel like to be 116?" And she said, "It goes by really quickly." She said, "It goes by really quickly." And so when you think about it, whether we live to beyond what do they call centenarian? What is it? Centenarian? I think that's what it is. Whether we live to a ripe old age, way over 100, or whether we are called home only after a few decades, way before we would like to, no matter what, whether it's a few decades or 12 decades, we're only here for a very short period of time. So while we're here, why don't we live a life that's adventurous, extraordinary, that does good for others, that doesn't cause pain, that doesn't cause suffering to others, doesn't cause suffering to our bodies, our minds, to our society? And that is my hope and my blessing. That's the ethics of eating. Thank you.